Hi, I'm Nancy Schertzing, Director of Restorative Approaches in Education for CDRUM. On May 7th, I had the privilege of hosting our inaugural Restorative Approaches in Education webinar. It featured the undergraduate course I taught last semester called Restorative Justice to the Power of Three: Philosophy, Principles, and Practices. We called it RJP3 for short. Because it was my first session, I forgot to record the opening segment, so I'll walk you very quickly through the first 10 minutes. During fall semester 2024, I got to teach RJP3 through the University of Maryland's MLAW program. I gathered each Monday afternoon with these beautiful men and women to teach and learn with them about restorative justice and how it's working in our world. When I decided to host this webinar, I invited any of my students who wanted to participate. 4 of them accepted. For the next 20 minutes, you will get to hear from Olade Kunu, Joey Wu, Ava Moreau, and Maral Mohammed about their experience in our class. They will also talk about how they have continued to use their restorative justice in circles training during spring semester 2025. I began the webinar with this question to give everyone an understanding of these students' attitudes toward restorative justice when they first walked into the classroom. Because I forgot to hit record, you will not be able to hear their answers to this question. I can tell you, however, that each of these young adults revealed some healthy skepticism about the concept of restorative justice and how it might apply in real life. As the recording begins, you will hear each talk about how their attitude changed and what convinced them that restorative justice could actually work in situations across the human experience.
So hearing from all 4 of our students about their kind of hesitancy before they went into the class, what I'd like to hear from you now is, as we were going through, at what point did you kind of either feel something resonate, or what made you think that this might actually work? And having watched or journeyed with all of you, I bet it happened at different times for each of you, and I'd love to hear what your story would be. Olade, will you start us off?
Yeah, for me, I think it really clicked when we started talking about how the focus of RJ is healing the harm that was already that was initially instantiated. And that's because I believe that hurt people do hurt others. I also believe that people are innately good. So a lot of time with our current criminal justice system, it seems to just focus on what was done, not how people reach that point, like not like the process like getting to. And so when we started talking about like how we can actually like talk about why people do certain things that they do, like how they were affected, how they're impacted, and bringing everybody to the table, that kind of resonated with me in the sense that this is what I feel like should be focused on. Kind of think about in our criminal justice system, like a mom that has to steal to provide for her 3 kids gets punished as a thief, rather than people focusing on, hey, like I had to do this because I had no other choice. But with RJ, it brings it to the sense that, oh, it's a whole effort. It's not just focusing on this one thing that was done, but it's why did you do this? Why did it happen? How it happened? Everybody that was affected, and how do we go about healing that and working towards a better fix? And that's kind of like, yeah, that's really what's sat with me. Well, that's how what with me.
Thank you very much. Joey?
I would say the shift in my perception of RJ was definitely pretty like cumulative over the summer. But if I had to pick like one tipping point, I think it would be like when we started talking about real life examples of the criminal justice system instead of like smaller scale incidents like school punishments. I remember we spoke to, I think it was someone from Scotland who was talking about gang violence. And I thought it was like crazy how RJ was so impactful there. And I think what resonated with me the most was the focus on accountability through like dialogue rather than punishment, because like I mentioned before, I thought the traditional like punitive model was the most effective. And I realized that RJ kind of just centers the harm done and it looks to repair it, which I think personally is more meaningful and effective than just simply punishing someone. And it also made me think it could work because I've seen how people just shut down or get defensive when they're punished without being heard. And I think that this kind of process feels more sustainable in reducing harm long term. instead of just like locking someone up and expecting things to be different when they're released.
Thank you. Ava, what you got?
Kind of bouncing off of what Alade said, but mostly the fact that I think there was 2 points in which that really stuck for me. I think one, we watched an introductory video in the beginning, and then I actually saw this be applied throughout the year where they highlighted that restorative justice, like the harm that is created without stopping the harm right then and there, it just continues to spread in other ways and can spread to other things, which I definitely have seen like in my personal life, where if one thing isn't fixed right away, then it continues to boil and boil and boil, and to the point where then everything's just going to go south. So I definitely think that like having restorative practices where we're not necessarily cracking down punitively right away at something, we're taking an approach that's going to actually heal the harm done and prevent future harm from happening is more effective than just giving out punishments where harm actually isn't healed, but people are just being forced to be punished for the harm that they've committed, but not actually healing that harm in the first place. So it's just going to show up in other ways down the road. But another time that I think I also saw like these practices that really stuck for me was when we started doing like hypothetical situations in class and doing circles together and kind of doing role plays with that. And I think even me and one of my fellow classmates would purposely kind of try and stir the pot a little bit to make sure that, you know, we could really fuel like what a real life harm situation would look like. But I think even after certain points during those role plays, like we both like realized like we can't keep up the harm and, you know, kind of instigating, because the harm genuinely would be fixed by now in real life, because the practices themselves work so well. So I definitely think those two instances were pretty pivotal to me.
Thank you. Maral.
I think I also have a couple different points where I just felt it really in action, and also just like within me, it's one of those like gut feelings where like, wow, this is really working. And I think the first is learning that also the person being harmed is just as much of the circle as the harmer, because like there are so many instances where like someone will be criminalized for their behavior, but no one will do like the actual background or community work that it takes to repair a family or to help emotionally the person who was harmed in the situation. And that to me just really resonated with me as a positive way that all parties involved could take out of the situation. And then the second for me would be the use of the talking piece and the centerpiece. That to me was just so impactful, because in circles, what happens is you choose a talking piece, usually something that people like choose to fiddle with, or something that means a lot to you, or the situation at hand, including the centerpiece, something just to look at when you don't know where to look. And that to me just showed that every little piece and step of this process is well thought out to make every party involved as comfortable as possible. And I just remember being in circle, being able to open up more than I had to like in any other class. I remember saying, wow, like these people, my classmates, my peers now know more about me than probably like even some friends that I've had since freshman year. So that, and I do believe that's because of the circle processes and the use of the talking stick, because I'm a fiddler and I have trouble making eye contact sometimes, like we all do. And so the different parts of the circle that were really thought out proved to me that this is something that people really care for. And it's one of those things where you get out of it what you put into it. And so it was really nice to see the effort that I made and my classmates made, and just knowing that everyone was putting in the effort by seeing it through whenever we would speak and stuff.
Thank you. My gosh, you can see for those who are attending why each of these students earned like an A+ in the class, because that you really have hit on so many of the really important elements. And I appreciate you all sharing in that way. Okay, so what the next question that we have is, can you please describe your capstone project and tell us whether the solution that you came to, because everybody had a successful, you came to a successful circle. Can you tell us, is it still working? What's different since you did the circle? And for those of you who are attending, just attending our session today, what these students did was they learned about like the basics of restorative approaches and like the philosophy, the principles, and the practices. And then we continued with practicing, participating in circles. They led circle in role play during the class, and all working toward their capstone project, which was they chose a conflict in their life that they would then run circle to help resolve. And we had the most wonderful array of situations that they resolved restoratively, and they will tell you about them now. Olade, want to start?
Yeah, so I think I want to talk about both the one that I did for this class and then the one that I'm doing for my current class. And so for when I took this class, my capstone revolved around my roommates and I. Our issue was the cleanliness of our apartment, and it was always a mess. And it actually got some of us heated because some of us would actually clean the apartment while other people would just like be making the messes and not be the ones cleaning up. So it really got annoying. But then we had a community circle where we sat down, we actually talked about like the issue, like why it is the way that it is, and then how we can fix that. And we were able to get to a good place without getting mad at each other. And the difference is then is our apartment is number one, a lot cleaner. Like now there's no more like dust balls around the ground. Like there's no more dishes in the sink, which was a big problem before. I remember during my circle, my centerpiece was the dish rack because the dish rack would always be empty and then there would be dishes in the sink. But now when I go into the kitchen, there are clean dishes in the dish rack and no more dishes in the sink. So that's really good. And then for my current capstone, it's was not participating in a circle, but more observing circles. And one of the ones that I was able to do research on was Mary Johnson and O'Shea, Israel. And that was a really nice case because it was one in which it was a homicide and they used the restorative method to solve that. And it was kind of nice because I was able to see how restorative justice can be applied to smaller case scenarios like the cleanliness of our apartment and larger case scenarios like a homicide case, and just being able to research that and see that was really nice. And then the difference with the homicide case is that even now with the person that committed the homicide and the person that was harmed, they're friends. Like they communicate with each other to the point that O'Shea Israel killed Mary Johnson's son, but Mary Johnson has pretty much adopted O'Shea Israel as if it was he were her own son. And it's kind of nice seeing how RJ does cover a wide scope of things.
Thank you very much. Joey.
I will say that my answer will probably mirror Olade's a lot. My capstone project for the RJ class was also involving apartment cleanliness. My best friend and her three roommates also had a lot of like cleanliness issues and communication issues. So it kind of went along the same veins. Like we hosted a circle and we had a very thorough discussion about responsibility and cause and like why everything was happening. And I would say that it did have like a lasting impact. I can see that I visit the apartment like pretty much every day. But it did have a lasting impact. I can see that the cleanliness is a lot better. And people are a lot more communicative about like when they aren't going to be able to clean and take responsibility for their own messes. And also, I also want to speak on my current capstone project. So, Alade Moral and I are all in our minor capstone. And kind of the goal of the class was just to pick any topic and create like a final project on it. So we decided to pick restorative justice, and we're actually creating a website just to highlight the facts about restorative justice, highlight different examples. So like a lot of mentioned, Mary Johnson and Shea Israel. And yeah, we just did a lot of research. It was great. I learned so much more about restorative justice in the context of the criminal justice system. And it's really nice to see like my capstone for the last class being kind of like smaller scale, like apartment cleanliness, and for this semester being like the entire US criminal justice system.
I am so excited, you guys. I didn't know you were doing that. Oh my gosh. Wow. So cool. Okay, Ava, what you got?
So I will touch on my project, but in addition, I've also done two circles with my scholars program, one last semester, which had to do with romantic relationships. A lot of my circles weren't necessarily focused around a specific harm that was caused, but more around conflict issues and issues within the community that we want to discuss and just try and make better. So the one in scholars for last semester was romantic relationships with Gen Z and how a lot of the times like social media and other things definitely impact the quality and success of those relationships. And the circle that I did this semester was actually around relationships, friends or otherwise, with people throughout this day and age, especially regarding different views in politics and how that can be really difficult to manage during a polarized time. But for my project last semester, I did a restorative justice circle with my sorority about kind of like the tier system in Greek life and how that affects self-worth. And I think during Greek life at all universities, but also at University of Maryland, there is like a tier system that definitely does affect the self-worth of some of the members in this organization and throughout this community. And I think we just kind of came up with a lot of collaborative ways as to how this harm kind of has started, what we can do as community members to reduce it. And a lot of like the answers that I received, because this is typically a taboo topic talked about in the community. So a lot of the answers that I received were extremely thoughtful and were actually quite useful. And I think a lot of the conversation was productive in the sense that it's still being utilized now. And I think people are more open and willing to talk about issues within Greek life, specifically pertaining to the one that I had a circle on, but also other issues that might not have been discussed as well. And throughout all three of these circles, I think a lot of the conversations and the biggest feedback that I received was just like the overall arching sense of understanding and comfort by having these conversations. I think a lot of times like harm starts because we don't actually have conversations about things that are difficult to talk about. And I think by having these conversations and kind of, preemptively addressing some issues that are harming our community, that definitely can help, balance and tamper the issues that will resolve later on. So I think that all three of them have been really successful and everyone's really enjoyed them. So I would say that's how mine have gone.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just have to ask, have you made your brownies or whatever you call those?
Oh, they're so good. My blondies. Yes, I did make them for my one circle and everyone would not stop talking about them, which made me feel good too. So
Good touch. Nice touch there. All right. Varel, will you share with us now what your answer?
Yeah, so starting off with my capstone project in class, I was able to do it on a group project, which I'm sure we've all had horrible experiences with group projects. But since now we have ended the semester in that class, I haven't heard from everyone, but we left on good terms. And now that we're trying to get published, so we were reached back out to by the professor, and everyone is just like working really hard to get published, to get like this thing that we've all worked so hard on and have had like conflicts within the group prior to our circle. So we're working on getting published. Everyone's responding, everyone's working on the document, everyone is just being really proactive, which was something I could only dream about before my circle. And now after this class, I actually based my honors thesis like with the university in restorative justice. So I was discussing the types of prison labor that women of color get compared to other demographics in prison. And so my suggestion moving forward was to just have more restorative justice policies moving forward so that we can decrease recidivism rates and incarceration rates in general. And I think it genuinely saved my thesis because my panel was like, okay, so this is different from anything you've ever experienced because no one's ever taken like a restorative justice approach to like decreasing incarceration levels. And to that, I say thank you so much, Professor Schertzing. Like, you 1000% saved my thesis. And just knowing that it accumulated, like this one class helped me accumulate this like 100-page document was just so crazy to me that I could actually put what I learned into practice. And I do have like everything in mind to keep going within, to keep learning about it. So that was really cool.
That is so awesome. And I will just add that when Morale says that people were not acting the same way in that group that's working together so well to get published now, she is not understating it. There was a lot of issues, I would say, in that group. So thank you very much.
Wow, that half an hour went by quickly. It was a treat for me to catch up with those remarkable young people and to see how they're using restorative justice to keep making the world a better place. Thank you for listening to their stories and joining me in learning from them. If you enjoyed this session, be sure to join me again at noon on Monday, July 14, for a discussion with Jim Hott and Jeff Smith of the Maryland Center for School Safety. Jeff and Jim lead the academy that trains school resource officers, SROs, and school safety employees, SSEs, in a number of education-related topics they use in their work in Maryland schools. I get to teach the restorative approaches portion of their training. I think you'll be interested in hearing from these former law enforcement officers why they think restorative approaches are an important part of SRO and SSE preparation. Because we only had 30 minutes, we didn't get a chance to take questions during the webinar. If you have any questions or comments about this or anything you heard here, please reach out to me at the email listed above. And if you're interested in learning more about restorative approaches, explore our Restorative Approaches in Education website, also listed here. It offers great resources available anytime you need them. It's all free and chosen to be useful for deepening your practice wherever you are. Thank you so much for your interest in today's webinar. I hope you'll join us again.